You have spent months perfecting the scene, refining the sensory detail, entering the state akin to sleep with precision and sincerity, holding the feeling of the wish fulfilled for as long as you can sustain it. And the results are inconsistent. Not absent, inconsistent, which is almost more confusing than if they were absent entirely, because inconsistency implies you are doing something right and something wrong simultaneously, and you cannot identify which is which. I want to tell you what is wrong, not in the practice, in what surrounds it. You are not what you imagine, you are what you say to yourself. I know what that contradicts. I said imagining creates reality, and I meant it. But imagining is not only what happens in the 15 minutes of formal practice. Imagining is happening all day, in every thought that arises without invitation, in every background assessment of your situation, in every unmanaged moment of the continuous murmur that has been running since you woke this morning. That murmur is imagining too, and it imagines with an authority and consistency that no 15-minute act can match, because it never stops. Tonight, I am going to show you precisely what that means, and what changes when you understand it. Here is the mathematics. Sit with it, because it is more confronting than it first appears. You spend perhaps 15 minutes a day in formal imaginal practice, perhaps 30 if you are diligent. In those minutes you are conscious, intentional, reaching toward the state of the wish fulfilled with everything you have. The other 15 hours you spend in a conversation you are barely aware of. The subconscious receives both, with equal weight, without distinguishing between the intentional act and the casual murmur, without awarding points for effort or sincerity or the quality of your scene construction. I know the objection. Surely the intentional act carries more weight than the casual thought. Surely intention matters. The subconscious has no category for intention. It does not know whether you were trying to impress it or simply thinking out loud. It receives what arrives, and what arrives most frequently, most persistently, most continuously, is what it acts on. This means that a single, sincere night in the state akin to sleep, a genuine, complete, correctly conducted imaginal act, can be entirely undone by a morning of worried thinking. Not partially undone, entirely, because the hours of contradiction that follow, if they run long enough and deep enough, overwrite the previous night's instruction with a new one. You did not fail at SATS. You succeeded at SATS, and then spent the following day contradicting it. The imaginal act is not the problem. What surrounds it is. Now I want to be precise about what I mean by what surrounds it, because there is a version of this teaching that sounds like think positive thoughts, and that is not what I am saying. What I am describing is not the thoughts you direct. It is the thoughts that arise, the ones that appear without invitation while you are driving, in a meeting, waiting for sleep, the ones that speak on their own about the desire, about the gap, about whether this is working, about whether someone like you receives things like this. Those thoughts feel like honest assessments of reality. They feel like the reasonable voice of someone being realistic about where things stand. I know how real that feels. The bank account is empty. The thought that you have no money feels like a neutral observation about an objective fact. It is not a neutral observation. It is an instruction delivered to the subconscious in the present tense. And the subconscious, which does not evaluate whether an instruction is fair or accurate or deserved, bills accordingly. They are not observations, they are instructions. Every thought that arises and goes unchallenged is received as confirmation of the assumption it expresses. Not a comment on reality, a directive about what reality should continue to look like. And the subconscious, faithful and precise, continues to construct it. So what is the correction? And I want to be emphatic. It is not to imagine harder. It is not to replace the wrong thoughts with right ones through deliberate effort. That is affirmation. the wrong instrument applied with the wrong force in the wrong place. Visualization is something you do. Assumption is something you are. And what you are speaks all day without being managed. The inner voice is not something you have. It is something you express. It is the natural outflow of the identity you are currently occupying. You cannot change the expression without changing the identity. And you cannot change the identity by managing the expression. The direction of causation only runs one way. I know what that sounds like. The changing the identity is the hardest possible thing, larger and more abstract than any practice instruction I have ever given. It is not. The identity changes the same way any assumption changes, by being inhabited, by occupying the state of the one who already has, until the thoughts that arise without your direction are the thoughts of that person, rather than the thoughts of someone waiting to become them. The financially free man does not monitor his inner voice. He does not catch himself thinking worried thoughts and substitute them with abundant ones. He is simply someone for whom financial ease is the ordinary background of his life, and what he says to himself reflects that background naturally, without effort, because he is not performing having. He simply has. That is the standard, not the managed conversation, the natural one. Now, about the transition between the managed and the natural. Most people expect it to feel like a switch being flipped, and it does not. It feels like a gradual loosening. One morning, you will notice a thought arose about the desire that was not worried, not performed, simply not worried. It was there and gone before you had time to examine it. That thought was not you trying. That was the new identity speaking for the first time without being asked. Notice it when it happens, not with excitement. Excitement announces that it was unusual, which tells the subconscious it is not yet normal. Simply notice it the way you would notice that the room is warmer than it was yesterday. A fact, a quiet confirmation that the soil has begun to change. So begin today by listening, not to what you visualize, to what arises when you are not visualizing anything, in the car, at the desk, in the silence between tasks, in the first thought of the morning, before you have remembered to be intentional about anything. What is speaking in those moments is the self you actually are, not the self you are trying to become, the self currently generating your world. The imaginal act plants the seed. The inner speech is the soil. You cannot grow a new crop in old soil. Change what the subconscious is receiving, not by working it harder, not by monitoring it more closely, by inhabiting the assumption until the thoughts that arise without instruction are the thoughts of someone who already has, until what runs in the background is no longer about the desire at all, because the desire has become simply who you are. That is where your world is actually being created, not in the practice, in the hours between the practices, in the self that speaks when no one, including you, is watching. Which is right now. Which has always been right now.